looking back on that experience, it really saved my life probably. It was a scary experience, yes, but I learned a ton. Hi, my name is Patrick. I live with bipolar disorder type 1. I had struggled for a while, starting kind of late high school with depression. And I've always been a pretty high energy person, like self-described, like a little spastic. September 2016 was the beginning of my first pretty serious long-term episode of depression. And prior to this, I definitely had felt what depression felt like. For me, it's more of a feeling flat and numbness where I'm not interested in the things that usually bring me joy. I'm normally a very talkative person, and I'm not feeling like I have much to offer at all when it comes to conversation. My favorite thing in the world is listening to music, and I have no desire. I just kind of want to like subsist, and I'm aware of something's wrong, but there's not a lot that I can do about it. So that's like the most challenging thing. And then I had taken a break from school, and then I returned to school at the beginning of 2017. I was still depressed despite, trying to do the whole fake it till you make it thing. And coming up on March 2017, I was starting to be in a little bit of distress, and there was a conversation I had with my 2 roommates at the time that, for whatever reason, spurred what would become a major manic episode. So this was about late March 2017, and I, in a matter of a night, the best analogy I usually use for people is if the lights were kind of off in my brain prior to that moment, there was a flip of a switch and the lights came back on, but it was like a blaring fluorescent light, hospital light type light. And all of a sudden I went from kind of feeling hopeless to feeling almost invincible. Like, yeah, like I got this, like I can turn it around. And out of nowhere, it was just a flood of energy, a flood of grandiosity, and having all these ideas on how I can, get back from where I was. I've always been a creative person, and I was just kind of having some, I would say, irrational creative energy. Something about mania that I didn't know at the time and would come to learn is it does feel fantastic. You feel like you're on top of the world. You feel like you've figured out all these things, and you go from feeling that depression that was so heavy where there's like a cloud over your brain to the clouds have like disappeared, but it's almost like you're just in a hurricane state of racing thoughts. Some, bad, but most of them are good. You're mostly like, I've got it. How is everyone not aware? How is not everyone on board with how I'm feeling? And, within 5 or 6 days of this flip, which would be the flip that kind of switched to the polar of mania, of the manic side of bipolar disorder, my family and friends were expressing concern because I had such a change of energy. It was almost like a different personality, but it wasn't normal Pat. It was not, I'm just back to normal. It's, I have a flood of energy, and if anyone is going to stand in my way of expressing this energy and telling me that they think something's wrong and I need to get help, I just was super combative, and I didn't agree with it. You feel like you're on top of the world, so when people are like, no, something's wrong, you're acting different, and I know this isn't the normal healthy you feel very attacked. The whole experience of the beginnings of the manic episode, I felt like I was in control, and I felt so happy about that because with the depression, I didn't feel like I was in control. I knew what I wanted to fix, and what I knew that I wanted things to be different, but no matter how much I wanted that, nothing was really happening. So these are like 2 really extreme truths that I learned when it came to going from a depressive episode to what would be the manic episode. And so within about 2 weeks, things were kind of like all over the place, and I had family that had come back. I was down in Missouri going to school. I was in my 4th year of college, and I didn't know that I was being brought home with the intention that I was going to be admitted to a behavioral hospital. It was a scary experience, yes, but I learned a ton. And so part of why I talk about my mental health so much with all the details, whether some of them are ugly or not, if you need to be admitted to a hospital, it's not a shameful thing and your life isn't over. It was scary, and I didn't like to be told, like, you have to be here for 5 days because we need to stabilize your moods, because if we don't, something really dangerous could happen. Because, like I said, with mania, you're not in control of your energy level, and your decision making can be like deeply impaired. Looking back on that experience, it really saved my life probably. I really was forced to look at myself and just be like, okay, it's time to take reins of my life. Even if, I'm scared and mad at the people who brought me here, this is my life and my brain, so I need to figure this out, and I need to figure it out fast. I was okay with knowing that I was bipolar, but I was also scared of what it meant in terms of like the behavioral changes that would need to happen, which, was taking medication and staying on medication, and just sleep. Sleep is like probably the biggest thing with bipolar. If you're not sleeping, that manic episode can get triggered. I am someone who fully advocates for taking medication if you need it, staying on medication, and destigmatizing the idea that being on medication is a weakness and that your life is over, your life is permanently different. Because if I wasn't on medication and if I wasn't able to tweak my medication since the last 4 years of being bipolar, things would just be worse. And as soon as I was able to better figure out my dosage or how I was supposed to take my medication in terms of how it was prescribed, has, quite literally been life-saving. So since the beginning of 2018, after coming out of my first really severe episode of depression following my diagnosis, I really started to see the difference, and I had gained some weight from just not taking care of myself. So I was able to get my diet in more of my control, and I was working out again, and I was feeling better about just my body image, and I was starting to feel more motivated about, getting back into school and what I wanted to do, and just like overall feeling like, okay, I'm like coming back to normal path. And I can remember how amazing it was to feel as I was getting better, and people were like, you just seem like you're in such a better state. And I was like, yeah, like I am, like, and I want to do whatever I can to keep that up. That's why I talk so much about what it takes to stay healthy on the basic levels of sleep, diet, and exercise, and just watching those, making sure you're in control of those. Just talking about how you're feeling, whether it's to a therapist or a loved one or whoever, and just working through that. If you let yourself feel like there's too much going on in your head for too long, all of a sudden it feels more out of control than it is. So that's why staying on top of my mental health is so important, and why I advocate it to other people so explicitly, because I know what it was like to ignore like signs that things were getting worse, and then I had just like this crazy brain chemical explosion and had that flip to mania, and it was easily the hardest thing that I've ever done. Just like not only going to the hospital and dealing with the aftermath of like, okay, this is what, I'm someone who lives with bipolar, I have to figure this out. Just the challenging element of getting yourself healthier, knowing how hard that was, and knowing that I don't want to do that again, that's just like another incentive to do the maintenance and use my coping skills that keep me healthy. I would love to be able to record myself and when I'm feeling good, and then be able to check back on that. That's actually, I love that there'd be an app for that, because that's what I do with journaling. I'm a huge advocate for journaling, because it was when I felt the most out of control and alone in my mania. I was able to process by just writing, like, hey, like just very diary style. I was able to pretty much like work through these racing thoughts by putting it to paper. So when it comes to journaling, I'm able to mark the date, and say by August am feeling better, I can look back on May and be like, wow, like you were really low. So let's just reflect on that you made it out of that. And then vice versa, if you are depressed and you can look back on, a little journal entry about how happy you are with, you just had a great day, you're feeling very grateful for, a certain friend who just you guys like are extremely close, whatever, you're able to look back on that. And even when you're depressed, you're like, I know that I've gotten out of this situation and I've gotten healthier mentally, so I know it can happen. I've actually had a friend reach out to me once and she was like, listen, I'm not in a state to like talk on the phone because I'm just like, don't have it in me, which I understand, like that I've experienced too while being depressed. But she asked if I could just leave a voicemail, just pretty much to check in, talk about how I'm doing, talk about how much I love them, etc. And I was like, that is like such a good idea, because then if someone does that for me, I can listen to my friend leaving me a voicemail, reminding me of like some goofy, funny story, and I can just get out of that state for a moment and remember like, you are so full of love and life and energy, and even though you are not right now as it feels, you've been and you will be again. That's part of living with a mood disorder, is it's probably forever. You can be stable for a long time and then something can happen and you just don't know. So it's like, let's plan for the worst and know that the best is on the horizon. I feel like that's a good way of articulating it.